Köszönjük szépen, hogy ma is velünk tartanak a Nézzél már ide című kulturális műsorban. Mai vendégünk Jürgen Dünhofen, dél-afrikai művész, installációs szobrász, festő, és most átváltunk az angol nyelvre, és az interjú további részét pedig feliraton követhetik. Köszönöm szépen. Hi Jürgen, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
First of all, it's a great honor to have an actual South African artist here in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's introduce you just a little bit to our Hungarian audience. First of all, what really is your family background? I know you come from South Africa, but how does one become a multidisciplinary or installation artist in South Africa?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So my dad's originally from Austria, and my mom is South African. And I mean, I was born in Cape Town. I grew up there my whole life. Yeah, I guess there are so many avenues to study and to work and to collaborate in South Africa. And I guess one of the avenues I took was I went to the Michaelis School of Fine Art at UCT, and I studied there. And what I've realized recently is that being in these spaces and being able to collaborate with people, especially in Cape Town, especially in South Africa, I think it opens up all these doors and possibilities. So I think that's how I started my career, was at Michaelis, and then from there I was able to meet so many other South African artists and international artists. As well.
Was there any art at home when you grow up? Did your family, did your parents deal with art in any way?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've kind of gone back in our family history to look at who happened to be artists, and we found like two artists in like the 60s and 70s on my dad's side. But honestly speaking, it was more them encouraging me and giving me a kind of a platform and suggesting that I can just dive deeply into making art, as opposed to us making art together at home, or you know, it was more of a safe space or an open opportunity for me to just be free and express myself, and they always encouraged that.
That is pretty remarkable, especially if we look at Europe today. Art is getting less and less attention, it's getting less and less funding, and most parents do worry about their children going into the arts in general, especially because building a career out of art is extremely difficult, and beyond talent, you do need a lot of luck as well. So was this ever a conversation at home, whether can you actually make a living out of art?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, I just want to like reiterate this support that I got from them and my mentors and my lecturers and my teachers. And in terms of making a career out of it, the question is always, you know, you study engineering and you become an engineer, right? You go into the field. You study art and you become an artist, and what does that actually mean? So yes, the question was always there, and honestly speaking, I think they knew it could be difficult for me, but there are so many avenues as an artist that you can find or utilize. It doesn't only mean that necessarily you're a commercial artist that you have to sell on the daily, on a daily basis rather. But there are other ways to accomplish this and to make it work. Yeah. So yes, the conversation was there.
Let's not forget the fact that we're currently in Budapest, and Cape Town is pretty far away from Budapest. So what do you think are the highlights in your career so far that led you to actually settling down here?
Let me just firstly say that honestly, Budapest is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever lived in. I feel so comfortable here, and when I see what's happening in the art scene, especially with my contemporaries, for me it's really inspiring, having lived in Austria just before. But I mean, there's been a long trajectory, and I studied in South Africa. I did my bachelor's degree there, and from there I had the opportunity to go to South Korea. I just had so many doors open there. I had a lot of opportunities that came my way, and including art residencies and exhibitions. And some of the key exhibitions that happened there only happened because I was not in the right place at the right time, but I was rubbing shoulders with young artists who were really trying to delve deeply into what they're trying to make, or their concepts, or what they're trying to unpack. And each door that opened led to, I don't know, so many other opportunities. This was a big part of my foundation as an artist, actually.
If you go back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
If you'd have to mention who or what inspired you in the beginning, because the fact that you want to work with art, with plastic art, with installation, with sculptures, I'm sure the inspiration comes from somewhere. There was a conscious decision to focus more on sculpting and less on painting, or not on music and not on dancing, but this form of artistic expression. Who would you consider, or what would you consider as a decisive factor in your life that made you want to go into this field?
First, I was an expressionistic painter, so to speak, when I first started. I was in high school at the time, and my art teacher, Mrs. Van Wyk, she was a huge influence on me. It kind of, again, gave me the opportunity and the inspiration to go into the grey spaces and figure out my thoughts a little bit, and to truly discover what it is I'm thinking and what I'm dealing with, and as an avenue for self-discovery. So Mrs. Van Wyk was one of the biggest influences on me. And later on, Jane Alexander, one of my lecturers at the University of Cape Town, she was also just a huge backer of what I was trying to do. And I think there's, just maybe as a tangent here, that there's a very important part in the way that one teaches, or the way that one speaks to people. And I think it's so important when you're trying to kind of elicit ideas, or you're trying to help people build on their vision. And I feel like these two specific teachers or lecturers, they did exactly that. They were able to draw something out of me that I didn't know was there. And almost like this, this limitless space without boundaries. And this is also a choice of why I went into art as opposed to other things. I teach as well, but I cannot not make art. I have to make art. And I think both of these, they could see that as well. Is that there's something within me that at every given opportunity, I want to express myself.
Do you think you were very lucky in this case, or could we generalize and say that those with a proclivity to do art do get chances? In South Africa, does art in education as present as to give everyone the opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when it comes down to it, I feel like within the art classes on a elementary or secondary or even a tertiary level, I think it's pretty supportive and pretty inclusive. Knowing that beyond the tertiary institution, life is going to be tough for an artist. It's not easy. For example, you might have to find a gallery, or you might have to, as I said before, sell artworks regularly, or find other avenue to support this. So I definitely think that given the opportunity, people are supported within the schooling system, and they definitely have the opportunity to create, again, knowing that it's perhaps not that easy afterwards.
Now, how did installations come about? How does an expression or a thought in your head become a 3D filling out of space? My question is, to be very blasé about it, what is your process, if we can use that word? So
this is maybe a good opportunity to link this expressionistic painting technique that I had at the beginning. So I kind of lost faith in that, so to speak. I don't know how to explain that clearly, but at university I was then encouraged in this installation process of making objects or of carving, or I particularly like constructing things. I think there's a slight difference here in terms of taking away mass and carving with a chisel and a hammer, and putting things together with like glue and then grinding it away. So going into the installation phase, let's put it that way, or me starting to think on that level, it definitely happened at university. There was an important change that happened, like a switch that went off, and I started to think in space. So in terms of distance from one thing to the next thing. And actually what started to happen was I started to think about how we physically see things. I then started to focus on the idea of how we perceive things, so kind of subjectivity versus objectivity, I started looking at things like phenomenology, so philosophical like discourse. And I started working a lot with lenses, and for some reason wood and metal, these kind of traditional materials.
That would have been my next question.
Yeah.
How do you choose the adequate medium for a certain work of art?
Yes, yeah. I think they kind of present themselves in the series of works that I create. So within this first body of work, Scope, again, I focused a lot on these kind of lens-based devices, things that you can look through, and also things that you can look at. And this kind of carried on later to other bodies of work like myopia. It's kind of nearsightedness, and also started touching on ideas of meditation. And so the material that I've predominantly been working with has been wood and lenses, and also found objects. I find this to, like, I enjoy having like a foundation or something that I can build on, right? And so having these found objects that I can deconstruct and add to, or I can mimic, or like, I think this is quite kind of important. But this has, of course, changed now over the years. I mean, this is, I was essentially since 2010, it's now 2025, it's 15 years. And I'm still drawn to wood for some reason.
Okay.
I think as a natural material. But of course, I have been working with mycelium, which during the lockdown became a very interesting process for me. Mycelium has been very interesting for me, and then also, I don't know if this is a material by itself or if it's just a process, but this kind of decomposition of things, or this rotting of things.
Have you ever considered, because when you work with wood or when you work with glass, there is a lot of physical work involved. What we can see today, and I ask this all the artists that come here on our show, in your opinion, 3D printing, for example, or modeling, does that help artists to create what they want easier, or is it the thing that is going to destroy your livelihood? How do you see that? Is it a tool that you can use, or is it a tool that those who are not as developed as artists can basically enter the market and take away the opportunities from other artists?
I definitely see it as a tool and as something that can assist an artist. I don't think it by itself will take away the livelihood of any artist in the world, really, it by itself. And so I'll give you two examples. One example is that I've recently used it in my work to the degree that it doesn't even look like a 3D printed object, really. So I think it's important how you integrate it, like what kind of material you're using from these processes. And honestly, I think there's a way of adding a human element, or the artist's touch. Or,
well, the design itself, I would assume, is also the artist's input into the fact. So the idea, how to incorporate it, that's all art. Does it take away from your process when you don't actually have to make it with your own two hands, or is that a natural development of modern technology?
Yeah, it's kind of like a theoretical question as well. I mean, maybe both, because personally, I like to prototype things, and part of my process is in fact tearing things down, building it up in real time. I can say it's a labor-intensive process, and I can say it's a highly inefficient process. Okay, so I think people that draw 100 times and then they print once, even in a 3D sense, I think it's a highly efficient process. And one could argue, and I would argue too, that this is of course a normal way of making art. So yes, I think that's no different to me carving out something or building something or doing it in the way I normally do it. But I would also say that I think 3D printing, there are certain elements that you can incorporate into the work. It doesn't necessarily have to be one mass, and if it is one mass or multiple things put together, then it can definitely be about the drawing or the process of going through the various iterations of the idea. I think this is the thing about art, is that you're going to go through, even within series or bodies of work or your whole career, like different iterations of similar things, or trying to unpack ideas. So I would definitely say that 3D printing can be exactly that, in the program that you're drawing in or modeling in. I mean, and for me, that's art. Absolutely, it's art.
Now let's go into the art then specifically. You have been an artist for a while, but we do know that the fact that someone is an artist or considers themselves an artist, and the fact that someone can actually exhibit their work, there is a world apart between those two. And I know that your first big breaks happened in South Korea, of all places. Why?
Yeah, I would definitely say, and I would encourage all artists everywhere to take part in art residencies, not only for your own personal growth and development, but essentially it's just, these are great places for networking, like really. And so because I went straight from university in South Africa to South Korea, I actually started my career in South Korea. Like, this is what happened. And being at artist residency Temi, for example, in Daejeon, 2014, this was a massive break for me. It was like it was integral to my future trajectory. It was the foundations.
How does one get to have an art residency in South Korea from South Africa?
Yes, by applying many times.
Okay.
Yeah, to various art residencies. I think so. Being observant and just trying to keep your finger on the pulse of all the different open calls. So I was specifically trying to aim for South Korea, and there are like multiple art residencies in South Korea. It was one of the open calls that came up because it was a brand new art residency, and I had applied to several art residencies already, and I was about to go back home to South Africa without knowing what the next step was. And by putting myself out there and applying, they accepted me. So yeah, so I would say definitely making sure that you know what's going on in the art world by applying to various art residencies is super important.
Now, obviously, we're talking about very large, very significant cultural differences between South Africa and South Korea. My first question is, when they saw your art, when they saw what you would like to create or your directions, did they understand it immediately, or would they rather take the approach of, let's see what this artist can create in our space? How did they approach it? Did you have to explain your art, or do you think it transcends cultures and countries, and did they just get it?
So there's a few different things that happened that I would like to reflect on. For example, you submit a portfolio and you essentially pitch the idea of what you're going to make at the art residency. So you might have to create an exhibition, a solo exhibition, or be part of various group exhibitions, or run a workshop. I mean, there are certain things that they would want from their side. And in terms of the work, I can't really tell you from the other side, but what I can say is that there was one specific person who I think really supported what I was doing and could see what it is I was trying to create. And this essentially was work from 2010 until 2014, and mostly relying quite heavily on this body of work scope from my K-list, from my first degree. And I guess it does transcend culture, because I was dealing with universal concepts. I was dealing with ideas of happiness being found in external places, or this constant search for a home that one might think is in every other place except for the place that one is at that moment. And so there's something that can't be fulfilled, essentially. And I think this is a very, not a human approach, but like a problem that we as every society in the world faces. So I think that's one answer to the question. And then also the work itself, it called for interaction. It called for people to partake in the installation, right? And I think that's something that really attracts not only viewers but curators and artists alike. And it's not something that's stagnant or stationary or hyper-specific to any one culture.
Now, you do the art residency in Temi, which is a big break, but many people don't know what to do after they have their first big break. How do you carry on the momentum? How do you find the next place? And is there a point where you start being afraid because there's suddenly too much exposure? Questions rise, can I create this much? Can I fulfill what these new places want me to fulfill? So what's the second step after the first big break?
I really like this word momentum. I've been thinking a lot about this word momentum recently, and essentially that these few years in South Korea, it's all about momentum. So I did very little thinking, and I did a lot of making. So I was producing a lot of work, and I was putting like my body, my soul, my health, everything into this thing, and I found that by seeking out exhibitions, by being proactive and working hard within the residency and trying to create networks and make friends, this was a great foundation for what came next. And essentially what happened during one of the shows, we had a group exhibition, and a curator from a project space also saw the work and was like, would you like to show at the space? Let's have a conversation. And I just had so many experiences like that within the art residency and within South Korea, that one thing led to another, one conversation. Sometimes we think that these conversations they can sit by themselves, but actually they can open up all these other like hidden doors.
If we look at your art specifically, or what you've created, is there a logical thread that goes through from when you start in Temi to then when you go to Seoul, or from afterwards to Cheongju? Is there a logical thread that connects these together, or each time we're working on different inspirations, on different concepts?
Yeah. So, to be very honest, the same series that was constantly developing, like every single day it would be developing. And so I would be recreating things, I would be adding to the works, I would be changing installations. So at that time I was focusing on this body of work, Myopia. And it incorporated like ideas of nature and elements of nature, such as grass growing or plants growing, and focusing on these living organisms and trying to like imitate them, and us as humans trying to focus on this. So like this idea of not overthinking, but just trying to simply exist. So I really like this idea, and using the lenses as a portal or as a mechanism to focus on these living organisms. And so this was the thing that was developing from Daejeon days at Temi, and then it got more refined and more refined, and every I keep going back to the word iteration, but every like level or way of looking at it changed constantly.
This was your work in Asia, and after a while you do move back to Europe. And in your European work, we suddenly see an ecosystem. We suddenly see nature. We suddenly see an obsession with mushrooms. How does the live part, or the living part of your art comes to be, and why did it come to be here while you were in Europe?
So there's a part missing there. It's a very important part. During COVID, we ended up in a little cottage in a forest in KwaZulu-Natal on the east coast of South Africa, and just a beautiful place, but also in the middle of nowhere, monkeys and snakes, and just really in the heart of it. And it was there that I got into growing mushrooms and fungi as a whole. I just became really interested in it, and I really liked the pragmatic, like analytical approach, that if you follow these few different steps, you'll have mycelium growth that colonizes a brick of straw that you've been sterilizing for the last few hours, or you might play with different types of species or strands, which might produce different elements, and the atmosphere or the environment or the climate or the moisture content of the air, it might affect what you're doing. So like there's all these like steps, all these things that you need to consider. And I had a very simple idea which I implemented in South Africa actually, which was this idea of having a sculpture with something that's living and dying at the same time. And for me this was very much the mycelium, the mushrooms. And so I was playing with these different species of mushroom. I was playing with Ganoderma lucidum, which is reishi, and Taurus, I forget the word now, but essentially these oyster mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, because I was working with wood, and inside I had these different things which could be broken down, and I was still focused on these lenses and looking at things. So I made this sculpture called Endless Possibilities in South Africa before going to Austria to study at the Kunstuniversität Linz. And so I think the inspiration of being in KwaZulu-Natal and being in Lidgerton, which is this tiny little village, I think that was the backdrop to all of this.
There is a question though, because if you think of classical art, right? Mm-hmm. If you think of the Venus de Milo, mm-hmm. or if you think of the Mona Lisa, or if you think about Boccaccio painting, there is a question of permanence versus perishability the moment you start working with living things. So if you create something for the Leben im Wandel exhibition, right, that is made out of mushrooms, there is a problem with how long will this work of art be visible in the form as it is. Is this something you considered, or the process of change is part of the art itself?
Absolutely, and that's a really good question. Yeah, so this constant transitioning became really important. It was also, if I think about how the work started to break down, and eventually this work specifically in South Africa, it broke, and it broke into like a million pieces, and it was still being like decomposed, right? Each time something happens, for me it's almost like a new work, right? And this the fact that it's so ephemeral or transient, there is something beautiful about that. In terms of exhibiting or storing or putting it in a museum, it's a bit tricky because you have to take into consideration how this thing might develop or how it might break down, and also that for one exhibition I had a basement full of grass with various sculptures looking at the grass growing, and then the grass started dying through an error from my side as well, but it's something that one needs to take into consideration, that these things are evolving or they are decomposing. And coming back to the Leben im Wandel, I love this idea of things growing out of dead things, so this kind of regeneration through decomposition. I think it's quite a beautiful idea, like conceptually. And for Leben im Wandel, there were artworks from some collaborators as well, Mani and Helena, and they were also focusing on these root systems and, you know, the relationship, for example, between fungal networks like hyphae and roots, and the way that they communicate, and then also these different like beings in the space that Mani had created. Also goes back to these microscopic / very organic beings that are within the soil composition, and this kind of like zooming in, zooming out. So yeah, I'm very interested in this, having not only an ecosystem in the space, but this evolution of something, and watching it rise and watching it fall. And I feel like it's something that we can all actually tap into. I mean, it's nature itself. It's a beautiful thing.
Now your art has taken you to, for the moment, 3 different continents. Are there any specific elements or any specific inspirations that you think you've gained through this constant changing from one place on the globe to another? Are there, for example, if we have to get specific about that, are there Korean elements in your art? Are there Austrian, are there German elements in your art, or does it all come from your original South African inspiration?
Yeah, it's a very tough question, I would say, simply because I think this thread can run through all cultures and can run through all continents and all countries. And in each place I've picked up something, 100% I have. And for me it's more the influence of my peers or my teachers or lecturers or the spaces that I've been in. But for example, I was very interested in this idea of being in the present moment and yeah, not hyper-focusing on what's coming next the whole time, which is then also related to this body of work before about looking in an exterior place to make us happy. So I think by moving to each place or by being in each country, I could see how people deal with the human experience. And I think those things connect more than they are isolated.
So if I have to ask you about goals, about future goals, where would you like to exhibit? What would be the project that would give you a sense of fulfillment? I wouldn't say the zenith of your career, but the next step you want to achieve.
Yeah, it's a really good question because I haven't exhibited in Budapest yet, but I would love to exhibit here, and I have some plans. I'm working on a body of work at the moment, which will be outside, and so I'd love to exhibit it here in Budapest.
Like an open air concept?
100%, yes, yeah, that's the goal.
To bring in more of the ecosystem in it. Aren't we afraid that it's going to be even more perishable, or is it that part of the process?
It's a tricky thing to deal with. It's not only the ecosystem itself, but also humans. I mean, we like to be quite heavy-handed sometimes with things. So it's something to consider, absolutely. But at the same time, I'm okay with it. Like, I think if I'm making something for longevity, there are certain things. I mean, if you cast in bronze, for example, or if you make a painting that's going to go into a museum or into a gallery space for long term, then that's one thing. But putting something into nature, knowing that it's going to be affected by the weather or that it might decompose or break down, I think you go into it knowing that part of it's going to change in a big way.
Are there any mediums that you would like to work with that you haven't had a chance yet, or do you think you're not ready for but are planned for the future?
I am planning to go deeper into working with motors and mycelium. And so we didn't talk too much about this, but this one project that I worked on called destabilization, where the mycelium itself was being shaken at such a velocity, at such a speed that it was actually breaking down the speed of connection between the hyphae or the hypha. I think this is such a poetic comment on society, this kind of stress that we experience as a group, but also as individuals, to be shaken like that. And the idea is that you'd normally shake this so that it would encourage some kind of growth, but if you shake it too much, it actually stops all growth. So my answer to your question is not that I really want to move right now into new medium or media, but instead go deep into this idea and use different type of motors and different types of mycelium to emphasize this concept that I've been working on.
So we do know that between South Korea and Budapest, there was Linz there and the University Linz, and you did do some work there. What can you tell us about that period of your life?
It was really inspiring and really important because I was trying to break free from some ideas. I was trying to move away from a series. Well, Myopia is a great series and it's going to continue, absolutely. But I wanted to venture into some new ideas and into new modes of art making. And that's how destabilization came about, but then also more recently, the alchemy of memory. And this was a big project because it was my thesis that I was focusing on, and it kind of opened up Pandora's box because there were so many ideas and so many thoughts and so many potential projects that came from it. And what it was focusing on was our relationship with nature. We've been speaking a lot about ecosystems and our place, in the world as humans. And I was looking at the way that we constrict nature for our own benefit and the way that we exploit nature for our own benefit. But at the same time, I was also unpacking some of my family history, looking at my memories with nature in Cape Town, where I'm from. And so in a way, this kind of tied things together, but also complicated things a lot because I realized how deep the subject could be. But the body of work, Alchemy of Memory, I suspended different sculptures, and I also I brought in a huge log, a big part of a tree, into the center of the space, and I essentially connected one of my artworks from this log to the wall and pulled it in both directions, in opposite directions. And then I also had parts of the tree inside the space. So it was touching on our relationship with nature, so like this idea of like nature versus culture, but these things are entwined anyway in many respects. And then also touching on this idea of a massive tree in my back garden as a child, that its roots were spreading underneath the house, and this kind of allegory, this idea of this free space for children to play and for me to imagine things, and then at the same time it being more or less destructive and our family having to make a call what to do with it. So this thing that grew very quickly, we cut it down, and how this was so sad and impactful on the family. And so yeah, so this again, my interest in nature and in ecosystems came to the fore. Yeah, so this that was my exhibition last year, December 2024. That I finished in Linz, and I would just like to iterate or reiterate what an amazing opportunity it was just to spend time with like-minded people and being able to dig deep into ideas or concepts and get feedback from my peers and lecturers, and finding myself again in this new interesting space where I felt a little bit confused, to be honest, again, but doing exactly what I set out to do, which was to break through kind of not an old mode of working, but changing tack a little bit.
Now, many people would say, not many people from the art world, but we do see more conservative political and social trends throughout the world, affecting basically every country and every artist. But based on what you've said, we're basically proving their point to a certain extent, because we do see that in your art you have global influences and global exhibitions, and you appear really in various parts of the world. Do you think that art in such an international forum, in the fact that you might come from South Africa, but your art is not South African art, it's 21st century human art that focuses on nature, does it take away from the work of artists, or it adds a stage, or does it make it more visible to everyone? Or are they right, the more conservative parts of the world, that say that we should guard our cultural identity more sacredly or more specifically to each individual nation and country? Did that make sense?
It did make sense, and it's I mean, I'm enjoying these questions because I feel like maybe you're able to get into my psyche or into my head a little bit. So that's maybe the third question now that I felt like, okay, I think maybe you understand me more than you know. I believe that there are many different ways to make art, and I believe that there are ways to focus on things that you believe in, and there are even cultural elements that will come to the fore without you even knowing it, right? And for sure, I think that if any artist makes, say, for example, socio-political work, that's fantastic. And I think if anybody makes purely conceptual work, or maybe like folk art, for example. I mean, I personally, I have a huge respect for every type of art that exists as a, let's say, as a genre. But my personal belief is I don't think that every single thing needs to be the same. And I don't think that, for example, me as a South African, that I necessarily have to focus on what it means to be South African. And inherently I do it anyway, right? Because it's a question of identity. But I think that it's more the concept that you want to focus on. So if you would like to focus on some of the terrible atrocities of the past, then I think that that's a valid focal point. Or if you want to focus on ideas of emotions, or if you want to focus on what it means to be Hungarian, I think that all these things are valid and can be interesting. But whether or not a South Korean must represent all of South Korea and have an artwork or a body of work that represents what it means to be South Korean, firstly, I think that is incredibly difficult to do, because from a human-to-human basis, we're all going to be remarkably different. And secondly, I think that can be interesting, but we run into problems of like gross generalizations, or not even stereotyping, but just, yeah. It depends on what you as an artist wants to do. I don't think it's anybody's duty to represent their nation or their culture, so to speak. But again, some of the most interesting artworks or artists do exactly that. You know, they zoom in on certain elements of their culture that are really interesting. For sure, I think there's a thread that connects all societies, and I think there's art that transcends not group mentality, but groups. I think that a viewer in the US and a viewer in Zambia, despite the lens that they look through, or the cultural lens or the cultural backdrop, I think that they could appreciate an Oliver Eliasson artwork that deals with perception and the environment, and they might take different things out of the conversation. They might project certain things onto it, absolutely. But whether or not Oliver Eliasson is representing his nature or his culture, I'm not so sure.
Now, we haven't touched really on your personal life, but we do know that you just very recently became a father.
Yes.
Do you see that as something that will affect your art, or that will affect your form of expression? Or we know many artists that the moment they have children, they stop working with art and they go out and try to find a real job, so to speak. So how do you see this colossal event in your life as becoming a father affecting your career and affecting your expression?
One thing I can say is that when I look at my son, or when we work together on art projects, he's only 8 months old, so we're not that involved in very serious art projects, but there's an inquisitiveness that's there, a curiosity, like a real curiosity that really inspires me and kind of rejuvenates me. You know, I think one tends to get, the older you get, there's this humdrum that exists, or this daily slog. And I think if you look at a young child, especially your own child, you realize that you can see everything with fresh eyes. Yeah, I don't know what influence it's going to go into the work, but I think the work's going to change dramatically. And maybe if you ask me the same question in 1 year's time, I can give you a better answer.
Do you hope that they go into art as well, or no, not at all?
It's a good question. Depends on what if we're talking about visual arts, if we're talking about like being a painter or a sculptor, whatever he wants to do, I'll support him, absolutely. And I'll definitely encourage him. I'll definitely encourage him. Yeah, like if he wants to paint, if he wants to be a sculptor, if he wants to go into some kind of design, if he wants to play music, anything he wants to do, I'll support him. Do I hope? For me, it's not a number one priority. You know, I more just want to be a good dad and give him the opportunity to do whatever he wants to do. And I get the feeling he's going to be a musician, but you know, I don't want to put any pressure on him.
And let's not decide now. Well, thank you so much, Jürgen, for coming in today our studio. It was fascinating. Thank you again for coming to our show. Hölgyeim és uraim, köszönjük szépen, hogy ma is velünk tartottak. Jövő héten is lesz Nézzél már ide. Köszönjük szépen, és maradjanak a Heti TV-vel.